Morning, everybody. Jesus is our blessed King. I love that song. That was wonderful. I love praising God and worshiping Him together with you all today. I hope you're excited to do it. It's wonderful. We are so blessed to be able to do this today. We are so unbelievably blessed by God. Okay, so this morning, what I'd like for you to do really quick is just try and think of something or a couple of things that amaze you. Think about a couple of things that amaze you. I was joking around with Brother Eddie, I think it was like a week ago or so, and I was joking about how and admitting that I'm a pretty excitable person, meaning I can get pretty excited or enthusiastic about something pretty quickly. I'm absolutely guilty as charged on that. If you've been around me for more than 30 minutes, you probably have seen that. And I can get amazed by things pretty quickly. I mean, just silly example, but one thing that amazes me is calculators. They really do. I'm not even messing around, because sometimes I see these problems that you can do by hand and it would take me a couple of minutes. Long division, for example, unbelievably long numbers, but you put that thing in a calculator, once you hit enter, there's the answer. That amazes me. And I know there's programming and stuff that goes into that, but that amazes me. And that's just a simple thing. But then there are more important things and bigger things that amaze me. For example, when Caitlin was pregnant with both of our girls, just thinking about all of the stuff that's going on while that baby is being formed in her body, and how every need that baby has was being provided for by her body. And just the whole process was amazing and mind-boggling to think about. And then maybe you think about how massive our universe is, the stars and the number of the stars, how many light years away our, I don't even know what to call them, cameras or satellites can reach, and we can see pictures of these things. But then how relatively we haven't traveled very far at all into space, and it's huge. Amazes me. It really does. So can you think of something that amazes you? I'm sure that we all have different things, and maybe it would be a good conversation starter, a thing we could get to know each other better. Like, what amazes you? What really amazes you? But what I'd like to do this morning is go to a passage of scripture where Jesus is amazed by something. Do you think if Jesus is amazed by something, you ought to know what that is? I certainly do, and I'm excited to tell you about it. I'm pretty excited about it. So if you'll open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 7, please. Luke chapter 7. What we're going to read about this morning is faith that amazes Jesus. Faith that amazes Jesus here in Luke chapter 7. So as you're turning to Luke chapter 7, just to give you a little bit of context, historical context really about what's going on, I want you to think about what life would be like for the Jewish people in the first century. The world superpower of the day is Rome, and your cities are occupied with Roman soldiers. So every day when you're just doing your daily life, you see Roman soldiers walking around. And that Roman soldier is a reminder that, you know what, I'm really not a sovereign state. I'm not really in control here. These Romans around me, they are the world superpower, and they tell me what to do. And if you think about the first century, before Rome took over, the Jews had a relative amount of independence for about 100 years, and they were really proud of it. The Maccabean revolt, maybe you've heard of that. They were really proud that they had independence for about 100 years. Then the Romans come in, and they just do not like the Romans one bit. The upper class, the social elites, they would be in cahoots with the Romans so they could get wealth and probably oppress people and really profit off of their brethren. But if you're a Jew in the first century, you do not like the Romans. You don't like seeing the Roman soldiers. And as a rule, the Roman soldiers, they don't care for you either, because the Jewish people got some special allowances that nobody else got. So Roman soldiers, they generally didn't like the Jews either. So the Jews were constantly starting these mini rebellions and these little uprisings in these places that the Romans would send somebody, squash that out. We're tired of these Jews doing this stuff. I say all this just to say, if you're a Jew, you don't like the Romans. If you're a Roman, you don't really care for the Jews that much. They had to pay taxes. I mean, how many of us like paying taxes? And they had to pay taxes to Caesar. And you think about the Jews who became tax collectors, like Matthew, one of the apostles. They were viewed as the scum of the earth for helping Rome. Like, why would you do that? Why would you help Rome? They are oppressing us all the time. And so they were absolutely viewed as the scum of the earth. So today, though, in Luke chapter 7, we're going to read about a Roman soldier who's different. A Roman soldier who doesn't fit the mold at all from the general, broader context of Jewish people and Roman soldier interaction. So in Luke chapter 7, let's read the first two verses, please. First two verses. When Jesus had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. And a centurion slave who was highly regarded by him was sick and about to die. We see here in verse 1, Jesus goes to Capernaum. And it's important to notice here that Capernaum, while it was a relatively small city, this was a center of commerce. And what's really cool is through some of the archaeological digs and findings, this was a Roman tax polling city. So if you think about usually where the money is, that's where you get a lot of extra protection, right? So Capernaum was a relatively small city, a center of commerce. It was a Roman tax polling station. So if you're Rome and you know that's where the tax money is going to be going to and coming to, you're going to send some soldiers there. So there were probably more soldiers there than maybe some of the other places there. We can read throughout history and see Capernaum was a strategic post for Rome. There's a centurion there. A centurion was a Roman officer, someone who was over at least 100. There are accounts where there's more than 100 people, but centurion, like century, 100 years, over 100 soldiers at least. And he has this slave who in verse 2 is highly regarded by that centurion. And that slave was sick and he was about to die. And I think right away we see something about this centurion that's a little bit weird. This centurion has a slave. You think about slavery in the first century, they had no status, whatever. As far as Roman citizens, they were not even considered a person. Now, I don't want us to get it confused with American slavery and things that happened here. Things were different. Really, every single thing, if you're a slave, could have been like an indentured servant. Everything depended on your master. If they were good masters, then, it really wasn't too bad. It was kind of just like working for hire, and over time, you might be able to earn your way out of slavery. But if you had a bad master, that just wrecked your entire world, and there was nothing you could do about it. You had no rights as a person. Roman citizens had a lot of rights, but slaves, even Roman slaves, could be punished by beatings, by death. They could be sexually exploited, or we mentioned this just a second ago, or they could have a really good master who provided all of their needs and was really good to them. Everything depended on their master. And evidently, this centurion seems like he's a pretty good master. Because here's this slave, someone who has no status, no social standing at all, who's sick and about to die. And this Roman centurion, he cares about him. And this slave is highly regarded by this centurion. And that's a little bit different than what we might expect to see. It seems that he could be caring. And it says this word for highly regarded in verse 2 could mean it could be that he's highly esteemed, or that the slave was valuable to him, or that the centurion honored him. Another thing that was interesting I was reading was it could mean that this slave was pertaining to high status when a slave had no status at all. So in the centurion's eyes, this slave had high status, although socially he had no status at all. So that's different. That's different than what we might expect from this Roman officer, someone who owned a slave who had no status or legal personhood at all. And I think right away we see something about this. But one of the things that's really important for this chapter is there's a sense of urgency here. This slave, as it says at the end of verse 2, he was sick and about to die. So this slave is on the brink of death. So there's a sense of urgency here in what's going to follow. So let's keep reading here and see some stuff that happens with this sense of urgency. Verse 3, please. Verses 3 through 5. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue." When this centurion, he hears about Jesus in verse 3, he sends some Jewish elders asking Jesus to come and save the life of his slave. We don't know if this is the very first time that he ever hears about Jesus, or if as the rumors and the murmurings and the news about Jesus has been spreading around, he's heard it before. But evidently, this centurion believes that Jesus can save the life of his slave, because he sends these Jewish elders to go and get Jesus, which is also something that's really different. We see that this is a wealthy man, because at the end of verse 5 there, this centurion is the one who built the synagogue for the Jews there. So you have to have some wealth to do that. So if this centurion is a wealthy man, that also means he would have access to the best doctors, to the best medical care, to the best kinds of treatments that were available, because he was wealthy. He had access to that. But instead of sending for the best doctor, or the best medical care or the Rome certified doctor of the day in the town or whatever. This Roman Gentile officer sends for a Jewish man, Jesus, who he believes will heal his slave. Isn't that different? That's a little weird, isn't it? That's not what we would expect to see from this Roman officer, but he does that. He absolutely does. He intentionally sends these Jewish elders to find Jesus. And did you notice what the Jewish elders said about the centurion to Jesus? They say, he is worthy for you to do this. Okay, that's weird too. For Jewish elders to say that this Roman Gentile is worthy of really anything is a big deal. And notice in verse 4, when they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him. So this centurion has made quite an impact on these Jewish people. They say he is worthy for you to do this. He loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue. This is a testament of the type of man that this centurion is. You think about the synagogues, that's basically a church building for them. They did a lot of the same things that we do here in their synagogues, and this centurion built that for them. It says he loves the Jewish nation. He's worthy. The Jewish elder said he is worthy for you to do this. That just really blows my mind. You think about secondhand compliments. You hear something great about somebody when that person's not around, and that's usually more true than if they're standing right there. Unfortunately, if they're standing right there, we might say something a little bit different than what we really think when they're away, right? Well, this centurion isn't here. These Jewish elders are saying he is worthy for you to do this. That's a big deal. This centurion is different. He's very different from what we might expect from Roman officers of the day. So there's no doubt. Seems like he's a good man. Let's keep reading. Let's go to verse 6, please. 6 through 8. Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it. So Jesus is making his way toward this centurion's house. Doesn't even make it there. It says that in verse, where was this? Verse 6, when he was not far from the house. So he doesn't even make it there. And the centurion sends some of his friends as messengers to Jesus. And this is where in this story, maybe this is where, if we didn't just read the verses and know what he said, maybe this is where we say, okay, here comes the Roman officer talk. You Jewish dog, don't come in my house. Stop where you are. I thought about it. I'm going to go get the Roman doctor, and he's going to take care of it. Maybe that's what we're going to see come next. Not at all. This Roman officer sends his friends to tell Jesus, Lord. I mean, before we even see what else he says, Lord, or sir, or master. It's a symbol of the authority that Jesus has. This is a Roman officer of the world superpower of the day, and he sends his messengers to address Jesus as sir, Lord, master. That's different. That's not what we would expect to see from this Roman officer at all. And then he says, don't bother yourselves further. Don't trouble yourselves further. And remember what the Jewish elder said, this man is worthy for you to come into your house, or for you to do this for him. And the Roman officer sends these messengers. He says, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. Who is this guy? This is nuts. We don't expect this at all. He says, I'm not worthy for you to come into my roof. Don't trouble yourself any further. Then he says, for this reason also, I didn't consider myself worthy enough to come to you. This Roman officer doesn't view himself as worthy enough to be in the presence of Jesus at all, whether he comes into his house or he goes out to him. That's different than what we would expect. And then further, this centurion gets better and better with each sentence, it seems like. Because then he says, let's see, at the end of verse 7, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Not in his house, doesn't see the slave. He's not talking to the slave, not touching the slave, nothing. The centurion sent people to Jesus away from his house. He says, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Wow. I mean, he understands something about Jesus that a lot of people in this time and a lot of people today still don't realize. And he explains what that is in verse 8. He says, I also am a man placed under authority. with soldiers under me. So he understands the idea of the chain of command, the authority in the chain of command. So I've got people above me, but I've got people below me. And with the chain of command, if I tell somebody go, he goes. No ifs, ands, buts about it. No questions asked. Go. He doesn't ask why, like some people's kids. My kids don't do that at all. I don't know what you're. No, absolutely. They'll say go and they go. And he says come and they come. And my slave do this and he does it. The centurion understands this is the chain of command in the military with this Roman army. That's just the way it works. I understand that. By the way, this helmet is actually a centurion's helmet. You would see the common soldiers, they wouldn't have a plume at all. And then some of them, you get up to higher ranks, it would be going this way, but the centurions was this way on purpose. So when you saw that man, you know that guy has authority over me. If you're a soldier under him, you know, okay, that's him. I've got a signal that says that. And this guy who has authority over soldiers under him calls Jesus sir. He understands this guy has a higher rank than I do. And if you just say the word, you have authority over sickness, death, and everything, it seems like. And the centurion understands that. A Roman Gentile officer understands that about Jesus. Wow. So what do you think Jesus' reaction to this is going to be? Well, let's take a look. Verses 9 and 10, please. Verses 9 and 10. Now, when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him. Your version might say he was amazed by him. And turned and he said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. When Jesus hears, it's not even the centurion there talking to him, which is so amazing to me. He sends messengers to Jesus. He says, I'm not worthy for you to come into my house. I'm not worthy to come to you. Just say the word and my servant will be healed. Jesus hears all of this and he is amazed. He is amazed by this. There's a crowd that's following him and he just turns to them and says, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. This amazes Jesus. This is great, unbelievable faith here. And what's crazy about these people that's following him, probably mostly a Jewish audience. And so for Jesus, who is a Jewish man, to say, basically, this is the faith that I've been telling you all about. This is the type of thing that I want. This is what I'm talking about. This is the faith that I want. And he's saying this to a Jewish audience that's following him about a Gentile Roman officer. That had to sting a little bit. That had to, maybe rustled their feathers a little bit. Because you know as well as I do that the Jewish people kind of had this invincible attitude about themselves. You know, God chose us in the past. We're always going to be here. You know, we got the temple over here. We're good. What are you talking about? So what? I hate my brother. We're good. God's got us. And Jesus here is saying, I haven't even found in Israel such great faith as this Gentile Roman officer. It's a big deal. That's amazing. And so in verse 10, when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. I think that's really important too. We don't have it recorded here if Jesus said anything. Did you notice that? The centurion said, just say the word and my servant will be healed. Just say the word. We don't have it recorded if Jesus said anything about the slave. We don't know if he said, okay, go back and when you go, you'll find your servant in good health. We don't have that recorded. If he said a word or if he didn't, when they got back, that servant, that slave was in good health. It wasn't something where he's on the brink of death and he's not dead, but he's still really sick. It's not something where, okay, the recovery process has started and in a few weeks he'll be good. Immediately, this slave is in good health. He was on the brink of death and is now in good health. That's just amazing. Wonderful. So I love this account. I really do. It's such a rich passage. It's only 10 verses, but I feel like we could spend 10 years just talking about it. So what I'd like to do this morning, based on these 10 verses, is I want to make some observations about the centurion, and then I want to make some observations about Jesus. And I want to see how those things connect, and we'll talk about it. And I'm just really excited to show you this. So the first thing I want us to notice about the centurion is that the centurion interceded. The centurion here, he wasn't the one that was sick in this passage. You know, it's actually his slave. It's his servant. But based on how much we talk about the centurion in this, it could seem like the centurion was the one who was sick. But he was interceding. He was pleading on behalf of his slave, of his servant, not for himself. And I think that shows something about his character as well. He didn't do all of this, go to all this effort, seek out Jesus for himself. It was for somebody else that he cared about, someone that was highly regarded by him, that slave. And really, that slave was a nobody. In Roman society, you're not even a legal person. And here's the centurion interceding, asking Jesus for help on behalf of this slave. I think that shows a lot about his character. He cared about this person. He realized he couldn't provide for them and asked someone who could. And we talked about how he could have went to a doctor. He had the funds to pay for the best medical care probably, and he seeks out Jesus. It's really interesting to me. What this centurion did in sending for Jesus on behalf of a slave, I think is very similar to what we do when we pray to God on behalf of our brethren or on behalf of people that we care about. We are interceding for them, and we intercede for whoever we're praying for, and we're going to the same source that the centurion did. So I hope that we are interceding for people just like the centurion did. But another thing I want to notice about the centurion is notice his humility. The centurion's humility. He was an amazingly humble man. For the Jewish elders to come to Jesus and say, this man is worthy, that just speaks unbelievable volumes. Because if you think about so many things that Jesus, any interactions that he has with people, so many times they're like, well, if Jesus knew who this person was, he would be shocked and would not let them do this. Well, if Jesus knew who these sinners were, and they're constantly looking down their nose at people. But here's the Jewish elders, and they're looking up to somebody. They're saying this centurion is worthy for you to do this for him. He loves our nation, and he built us our synagogue. But when the centurion sends messengers out to Jesus, the first thing he says, I am not worthy. I am not worthy. I'm not worthy for you to come into my house. I'm not worthy to be in your presence. And this is a Roman officer. I mean, you talk about Capernaum, it's a tax polling station. There's going to be a lot of Romans there. He has authority over people there. I mean, that would be a perfect opportunity for someone to get the big head, right? But he says, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. I'm not worthy to come out to you. I'm not worthy for that. Just say the word and my servant will be healed. This is different. It's so different from what we would expect at all. He doesn't see himself as worthy. And I think this is similar to something that we can do. You know, we can see each other on Sundays and we can see each other on Wednesdays, and we can think, oh, that brother's really got it together. Or someone gets up here to preach a lesson and, oh, that was a great lesson. He must really have it figured out. When there's stuff on Friday night and Saturday night that you all don't know about, that I know about. And it's just kind of like, well, that's a worthy man over there, but we know things about ourselves that other people don't know. And we know that we're not worthy. I love the humility of the centurion, and oh, that we would have the humility of the centurion. The last thing I want to point out about the centurion is the centurion's faith. And really that's what this whole text is about, is his faith. It's unbelievable. And one of the things is that faith can be found in unexpected places. If you asked any of these people here, especially this Jewish crowd following him, where do you think the best faith that Jesus is going to talk about today, where do you think that's going to come from? There's no way they would say a Gentile Roman officer, right? I mean, there's no way they would do that. And yet, this is faith that amazes Jesus. The centurion heard about Jesus. Instead of sending for the doctors, instead of sending for all the access to medical care that he had, he seeks Jesus. He wants him. And then before Jesus even gets to his house, he says, I'm not worthy. Just say the word. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. You don't have to be in my house. You don't have to talk to this slave. You don't have to touch this slave. You don't have to have any interaction with this slave. You just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Amazing, unbelievable faith. Just say the word. And so this is faith that amazes Jesus. And I hope and pray that we would have faith like this centurion. So now that we've done this, we've looked at the centurion, we've seen some things about him in this passage. What I want to do now is notice some things about Jesus in this passage. And the first two, I think the centurion understood really, really well. I think the first two, the centurion understood about Jesus really well. But the third one, I'm not so sure. But he came to know it, and I'm excited to show you and bring this out from the text. The first thing is the authority of Jesus. The authority of Jesus. The centurion understood the complete authority of Jesus. When the messengers from the centurion, they came to Jesus, they're approaching his house, they address him, just how they address him, Lord, Sir, Master. That is a signifier of someone who is a higher rank than the people that are going to see him. The centurion understood right from the get-go, Jesus has more authority than I do. A Gentile Roman officer I can't emphasize that enough. That blows my mind. He sent people to address him as Sir, Lord, Master. He understood his authority. Right away, too, though, he's sending these representatives, and the centurion understands he has a higher rank. Down in verses 7 and 8, where he talks about his understanding of the chain of command. He says, I tell somebody to go and they go. I tell somebody to come and they come. It seems like he understands that Jesus has complete and total authority over the sickness that his slave has, the death that might come over him, and anything else that's around him. The centurion understands you have authority over this sickness, because if you just say the word, my servant will be healed. And the centurion, a Roman Gentile centurion, understands this about Jesus. So then naturally the question comes from this: do we understand the authority of Jesus? Do we really understand it like this centurion did? Not just a hypothetical, okay, that's the way it works. I understand how a chain of command works. Do we understand how the chain of command, the authority of Jesus, works in our lives every day? Do we really fully get the weight of that? Because if Jesus has total and complete authority, and he does, then he has the right to tell us how to live every second of every day of our lives. Every second of every day of our lives. And we are so blessed to have his words revealed to us. And he tells us how he wants us to live. And if Jesus has total and complete power and authority, and he does, he has the right to tell us how to live our lives. And so as we read through Jesus's words and we see the explicit things that he tells us, do we recognize his authority over us? Do we recognize that? That's, I love this. That's just the chain of command, right? In the military, I wish Jung was here because I would point him out. He's a military man. In the military, if your superior officer says, swab the deck, you don't say, why? You don't do that. That's not the chain of command. You're about to be put on your face if you do that, right? And if we understand the true chain of command that is beyond our physical universe of Jesus, we will do what he says when he tells us to do. And when we don't have enough faith to do what he says, it shows that we don't believe in his total and complete authority. Okay, Jesus has total authority, but let's look at another thing in this passage, and that's the power of Jesus. The power of Jesus. The centurion, it seems like, understood the power of Jesus, because in verse 3, he sends the Jewish elders to go get Jesus to save the life of his slave. You don't go asking for somebody to save the life of your slave unless you believe that they can save the life of your slave, right? And so he believes that Jesus can do that. But then even further, it really, to think about this, blows my mind in verse 7, where he says, just say the word and my servant will be healed. Not even in his house. He had no interaction with the slave at all, didn't see him, didn't touch him, didn't talk to him. And the centurion believes about Jesus. Just say the word and my servant will be healed. So this Gentile Roman officer understood something about the power of Jesus. His power isn't restricted to where his physical presence was. Just where you are right there, just say the word and he's going to be just fine. That blows my mind. This Gentile Roman officer got that about Jesus. And so Jesus is all powerful. And then the question is, do we recognize that? Do we recognize that Jesus is supremely and totally, completely powerful over our lives, completely able to do anything beyond what we can ask and beyond what we can think? Do we live our lives in a way that shows that we believe that Jesus has total and complete power? Or do we live our lives in a way that shows that we doubt his power or that we limit God in some way? I think, like what we talked about last week, it can be so easy to limit the power of God. It's so easy. Speaking for myself, it's so easy. When trials or bad times come and they hit us, do we rely only on ourselves and try to fix all of our problems on our own? Or do we give it to God? I think if we're trying to do it all ourselves, it's because we don't believe in the power of God. If we have fear and anxiety that we're going to fall, we're going to fail, we're going to struggle with these things, I'm going to fall, and I just can't do that, or this thing's not going to work out, or we won't take an extra little step of faith because I don't know about that. I think we're limiting the power of God in that. When we have things about our prayers, do we neglect our prayers? Do we neglect asking God, telling him about all the things we want, our desires, the things that we're struggling with? Or again, do we just try, I'll figure it out. I'll carry myself up by my bootstraps and I'll figure it out. No, we're limiting the power of God. Jesus is supremely and totally powerful. One of the things that I was reading about and saw this, and I thought it was so appropriate for this. Do we separate our church self from our every other day of the week self? Do we act one way on Sundays and Wednesdays because that's what you do on Sundays and Wednesdays, but then Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'm going to live my life a different way. And maybe because we limit the power of God or the authority of God, as we talked about in the last point, or in our grumbling, our complaining, and our murmuring, like the Israelites in the wilderness. We can be so similar to them, can we not? It's because we're limiting the power of God. Jesus is supremely powerful. The centurion believed in the total power of Jesus. So do we believe in that? So those are the two that I really think the centurion understood that. And we can tell by the way he approaches Jesus, the things he sends messengers to say. But this last one, I'm not sure if the centurion knew this, but I think he would come to know it throughout this whole interaction. And that's the care of Jesus. The care of Jesus. I'm not sure if he understood this or not. I mean, just think about the time period. A Jewish man and a Roman officer. Just, those are two things that don't work out, right? Just generally speaking, they don't like each other. And so I'm not sure if the centurion fully and totally knew that Jesus would respond to him. He sends the Jewish elders out to Jesus and says, come and heal my slave. We really want you to come and heal my slave. It could be that this Roman Gentile officer was expecting a no. We don't know, but just given the tension between Jewish people and the Roman soldiers, don't you think he'd be kind of right in doubting, like, okay, I'm just going to send for him. I believe that he can do this. I believe he has the power to do it, but he might say no, and that's that. We don't know. But Jesus does come, and he does heal his slave. And it's really mind-boggling to me, because you think about so many of the interactions that the Jews had with the Romans. They would follow along with the law, the things that they had to do under the pressure of the force of them squashing any rebellion or not listening to them. Yeah, they'd follow along, but they didn't like it. They didn't like doing it. And here's Jesus who comes and he heals this centurion slave. And it's just really mind-boggling to me. The point here is that Jesus cares about everyone, and especially those who put their faith in him. It doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. If you're a Gentile Roman officer who's occupying Israel, it doesn't matter what your background is, your mistakes, no matter any of that stuff, Jesus cares about everyone. And the centurion came to know that through this entire interaction. These are two people who have no business interacting with each other at all. A Gentile Roman officer and a Jewish man. They had no reason to interact with each other. But Jesus cares about everyone, regardless of nationality, political allegiances, race, gender, mistakes. I mean, you name any characteristic you can think of, doesn't matter. Take it off the table. And that's the good news of the gospel. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you're from. None of that stuff matters at all. Jesus cares about you. And Jesus wants you to put your faith in him like the centurion. Isn't that beautiful? It's wonderful, and it's amazing that Jesus, who has total authority and total power, he cares about you. It's too good. It's too good. So as we've talked about this morning, I just want to point these things out again. Jesus has total authority to tell us how to live our lives. Jesus has total and complete power to make changes on us, in us, and through us, and on anything that we can pray about. I promise you that. Jesus has total power over that. And Jesus cares about you. He cares about you. He wants you to respond in faith like the centurion. And so this morning, as we close, if you want to study about who Jesus is and you've never done that before, we'd love to study with you. Absolutely, we'd love to do that. But if you've studied, you know who Jesus is. You know he has total authority. He has total power, and he wants you to respond in faith because he cares about you. If you want to have your body immersed in water for forgiveness of your sins, we got water. We'd love to do it anytime. We would love to do it. Or if you've become a Christian before, but your faith has wavered, it's been lacking, or you've proven that you haven't been living a life that shows Jesus has total authority, that shows that Jesus has total power over your lives, and you want to make it right. If you have anything in your life you want to make right today, please do it. Do it today. And you can do it right now while we stand and while we sing.